So I thought I'd revisit a video from about a month ago where I asked what's wrong with Star Wars. If you haven't watched that one yet, you really should, because I'm going to be addressing comments from viewers, so you may be lost otherwise. I'll put the link right up there if you want to catch up first and then swing back. Also, I'd suggest watching the whole thing. It's only about 12 minutes. For starters, I still think I'm right about what I said, obviously, but even in that first video, I said toward the end that I expected some pushback, and I got some. Not a ton though, and I was really surprised that I got as many comments as I did that were in near total agreement with me. But there were some challenging comments that I was interested in exploring, so that's what I'm going to do here. Before we get started, I'd really like to thank everyone that swung by and watched some of the videos I put up. I put up my first video less than 3 months ago, and counting this one, I only have 13 up in total. I'm happy with the place so far and kind of think it looks like a real channel if I say so myself. Better yet, many of you seem to agree, which is super cool. I'd especially like to thank those of you that have enjoyed them enough to like and subscribe. I really try not to pester anyone about it because it annoys me as a viewer of YouTube channels when creators do that, but I did want to at least take a second and thank all of you. I'm not going to be making any thumbnails with my mouth hanging open or with clickbaity titles. That's not really my style. I have no specific goals for this place other than to keep making these because I enjoy doing it. So the more you engage and show YouTube this place is a going concern, the more fun it can ultimately be. So thanks for those of you that have, and if you haven't, please consider it. It doesn't cost you anything but a click, and it really does make a difference. Cool, let's get started. Ultimately, my main point with the other video was that I've come to the conclusion that the Star Wars universe should have just remained the original trilogy only. And for the sake of this argument, I don't bring up any of the extended universe novels that were considered canonical. Not because I have any feelings good or bad toward them, but because I never read them, so to me, they don't exist. So my argument is one of someone that was a big fan of the movies, but not enough to have read any of the books, so much more of a Star Wars normie than someone that would have shown up at a convention, for instance. And while I still agree with that belief, there were some that felt similarly but said they would have been less inclined to agree if so much of the content didn't just outright suck. That one did make me think a bit. Like I'd said, I wasn't opposed to more Star Wars until fairly recently. I loved it enough to willingly pay to see each prequel in the movie theater when they came out, even though I grew to dislike each one soon after watching it. I was actually excited for Disney buying Star Wars since it was my belief at the time that Lucas had become the problem. And it finally took this asshole to make me walk away entirely. But would I feel differently if it had all been good after the original trilogy? What if the prequels had a ton less obnoxious CGI? What if they'd kept the same look and feel of the originals with far more practical effects rather than making everything look better? What if the plot at times didn't seem like it was being read by Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller?
Right here with the taxation of trade routes and has now engulfed our entire planet in the oppression of the Trade Federation.
In an effort to alleviate the effects of the... Anyone? The Great Depression.
What if Anakin talked a little less about sand?
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Well, what then? Well, yeah, I think I'd have been on board. Another way of saying that is, if it didn't suck, would you have liked it more? Yup. I mean, I was all in wanting more Star Wars by that point, but just with each movie I felt further and further away. It's why I originally had hope when Disney bought Lucasfilm. Oh, I'm 100% in agreement with this, obviously. In hindsight, this was horrific for any hope in keeping Star Wars even close to what it once was. Disney has basically become an entertainment vampire, sucking the creativity out of the various franchises they buy and tossing their used carcasses to the side. I mean, I'm assuming you've all heard the world is getting another Rey movie, right? So I think it's undeniably true that there was no possible way that Disney would honor Star Wars, and I'm ashamed I didn't see this at the time. Like most people, I allowed the fact that they'd yet to ruin Marvel by that point lure me into thinking they'd be successful with Star Wars. I was wrong. So I think this is a non-starter. If my choice was between there being only the original trilogy and Disney buying it and doing what they've done, I'd still be completely in favor of there having never been anything but the original trilogy. Oh, agreed. But I was saying this going back to the prequels. It absolutely chapped my ass that R2-D2 and C-3PO showed up there. Ridiculous, and it forced Obi-Wan to be a liar when he first met Luke. And don't give me any of this semantic horseshit that he wasn't lying, since when he told Luke he didn't seem to remember ever owning a droid, he just meant that he didn't have the actual pink slip from the droid dealership or something. This is one of those times where lore was stepped on in favor of trying to expand something in the past that hadn't been fully fleshed out. Likewise, having Anakin actually be responsible for making C-3PO was not just pointless, but it was another thing Obi-Wan needed to pretend he didn't know. I mean, obviously where it got awful was the Disney trilogy. And back when I still had hope Disney would do this right, I hoped that they'd jump forward a few hundred years, well past the adventures we were familiar with. After all, at the end of Jedi, we'd literally seen the Empire and the Emperor destroyed, Anakin redeemed, and Luke and his friends saved the day. Surely it would take a while for things to all fall into the crapper again, right? Well, not if you're scared you can't lure an audience into the theater based solely on your own creativity. So Disney trotted out Han, Chewie, the Millennium Falcon, and Leia in Force Awakens, only to unceremoniously kill Han Solo on screen before we ever got to see the big three together even once. Then they turned Leia into Mary Poppins in The Last Jedi, turned Luke into a pathetic hermit who tried to murder his own nephew, and eventually killed him to make room for Rey Sue. But why? Because Disney was so afraid that no one would come unless they paraded around old characters that they instead used them as bait, only to then destroy their legacies on screen to help make the new characters seem better. I think the opposite happened, and I think that's largely why there was such a fan revolt. So yeah, I think that should have always been the protocol for dealing with trilogies within Star Wars. The prequels were always going to be more connected because of the story it was telling, but there didn't need to be so many crossover characters. Obi-Wan, Yoda, Anakin, Vader, plus the Emperor were fine. Anything else and it starts getting too complicated trying to keep lore straight. And there should have been zero starting with any future Star Wars movies. If there truly is a Star Wars universe, then it should be bigger both in space and time than this one family and their close friends. This one I get entirely, and I did try and address this in the last video, though I may have addressed it more specifically in another video, which I'll link above and again at the end of this video. Part of my dislike of constantly seeing nonstop reboots and reimaginings, etc., is that younger generations don't get their own stories and heroes. And no, getting a new Star Wars story isn't the same as being able to go and enjoy Star Wars even though it came out long before you were born, and also getting some new cool space saga made when you were a kid that could be yours the way Star Wars was ours. Maybe it's a nuanced point, but I think it's an important one. I'd have felt robbed if when I was a kid, all I got was rehashed stories from the 50s instead of the fantastic array of new franchises that were everywhere. It really does bum me out that you guys can't see you've been cheated by this. But I completely understand why you're attached to the stories you saw as a kid and why you recoil when I suggest they shouldn't exist. I mean, for you, they're your childhood. You're connected to them the way I'm connected to mine. That makes perfect sense. All I'm saying is that those feelings you have for that content would be exactly the same if instead of going back to the well to make more Star Wars, creators had made something new for you, something that was truly your own that you'd have grown up with. And if it was great, I guarantee you, I and others would have gladly enjoyed it as well, and it would be a connection we'd share. The only difference is we'd all be better off with more franchises rather than fewer. So yeah, in conclusion, given where we are now in our own timeline, I definitely wish would have stopped after Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. With each passing day and each horrendous announcement from Lucasfilm and Disney, I'm only surer of this position. But in a different timeline, I would have been so inclined to be open to more Star Wars had it actually been good, and the mouse never laid a white glove on it. The only caveat I'd add is that it would only ever be feature-length movies and never TV series. Going back to my first video, scarcity really is important. If we'd have gotten that, I think Star Wars could have continued and been culturally relevant, and there wouldn't have been so much of it that there was virtually no room for new creators to give you guys something new for yourselves. So, what do you think? Am I still 100% wrong? Is this whole video doo-doo? For those that agreed with my previous video, would you be open to these caveats? Or are you one of those lunatics that just can't get enough Rey? I'd love to know what you think, so if you'd be so kind, please let me know in the comments section. Or, I don't know, don't. I'm not the boss of you.